Let's get one thing straight. You were never supposed to be here. They designed the collapse. They wrote the script with your defeat as the final scene. They counted you out before you even stood up. But here you are, not just breathing, not just functioning, but thriving, dominating, rising. And that's why they're panicking. Because no matter what they tried, betrayal, silence, sabotage, delay, it didn't work. You're still here, unshaken, louder in presence than ever. You are not ordinary. You are not forgettable. You are one of the anointed ones, marked, refined, forged in fire. You're the kind of person life tried to break 100 different ways, but each time, you just rebuilt yourself stronger, quieter, smarter. You didn't just survive what was meant to finish you, you became the reason their system cracked. This isn't just motivation. This is your confirmation. You are the proof that divine favor beats human strategy every time. You've already won by refusing to fold, and now the ones who tried to bury you are forced to watch the rise they never prepared for. So stand up, straighten your crown. You weren't lucky. You were called. You were built for this. Welcome to the reckoning. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come. Underneath every blow they delivered was a mirror they were trying to shatter. Not because it showed you, but because it revealed what they couldn't hide about themselves. The conflict was never really between people, but between truths that couldn't coexist. They watched you move without disguise, anchored not in noise or applause, but in something deeper, something they couldn't name, yet feared. You didn't speak louder, you simply were, and that presence alone disrupted the illusions they clung to. Their attempts to tear you down weren't about defeating you. They were a frantic effort to silence the part of them that felt hollow next to your stillness. They threw shadows, hoping to dim the light they couldn't imitate, but in trying to drown your voice, they exposed the echo of their own unrest. They were rehearsing victory in a play you never auditioned for, casting roles you refused to play. And when the curtain fell, you were still standing, unchanged. Now the silence you left behind speaks louder than anything they ever shouted. Proof that their war was never with a person, but with the absence of truth in themselves. Not everyone bends reality when it tries to bend them, but some do, and it's terrifying to witness. What was meant to collapse the spirit instead became a forge. While others count survival in scars and silence, this kind of existence reshapes the battlefield altogether. Every hit absorbed became a spark, lighting up the blueprint for a life others can't decode. They expected someone shattered, maybe crawling or numb, but what emerged wasn't a patched-up version. It was a whole new force, unpredictable and untamed. Pain wasn't endured. It was disassembled and reassembled into insight. Where others would freeze or fracture, every loss turned into architecture, building a new kind of strength that doesn't scream but shifts. Movements became too fluid to track, reactions too calm to manipulate. The old games stopped working because the player became the architect. What was once aimed to diminish ended up awakening a clarity that can't be reversed. They mistook ruin for a finish line, not realizing it was the start of something impossible to dismantle. And now, from a distance, all they can do is watch the shape of someone they thought they understood, move like a force they'll never comprehend, unwritten, unshaken, unbothered. Some stories pause so quietly, people mistake the silence for an ending. They misread the stillness, thinking the chapter had closed, not realizing the page was simply turning in a way they couldn't follow. Laughter echoed too soon. Hands clapped for a victory that never belonged to them. They took absence as defeat, misjudged retreat as ruin. But in the space where they assumed you vanished, something was quietly forming, stronger, sharper, far beyond their understanding. While they marked your name with dust, you were becoming fire beneath the surface. They didn't factor in that some rise not with noise, but with precision. Not rushed, not loud, just deliberate, focused, re-engineered. What they thought was your unraveling was simply your reconstruction. They danced too soon around a finish line that never existed. And now, faced with someone they can't categorize, they struggle to comprehend how the outcome slipped from their grasp. The real error wasn't in trying to break you. It was in thinking they could predict what you'd become. While they were trading stories of your downfall, you were rewriting the entire script, and now they're left watching a narrative they no longer control. They believed they were engineering your collapse. Each calculated strike meant to reveal a fracture. But in reality, they were navigating a maze of their own making. Unaware, they were the ones under the lens. Pressure doesn't invent character, it exposes it. And while they tangled themselves in tactics, convinced they held the upper hand, every move revealed more about their inner framework than about yours. They mistook stillness for submission when it was composure. They expected flinching, but encountered foresight. Their need to provoke only underscored how deeply they feared what they didn't understand. What was meant to corner you only illuminated their limitations. They were reading from a manual built on assumption, unaware you had already rewritten the rules. While they pushed, hoping for chaos, they ran headfirst into their own reflection. The truth is, it was never about whether you could withstand the fire. It was about how calmly you stood while they burned themselves out trying to light it. Every whispered plan, every forced confrontation, every petty maneuver, all it did was clarify who was truly in command. They were never testing your strength. They were confirming their own weakness. He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Psalm 23:5. You see, sometimes when God pulls you back, it's not rejection, it's positioning. Just like a slingshot, He draws you into stillness not to silence you, but to launch you farther than they ever imagined. While they were clapping at your absence, thinking it meant defeat, heaven was setting a table with your name on it. They mistook the quiet for a cancelled assignment, not knowing that growth rarely makes noise. They assumed that by cutting you off, you'd cave in. But the wilderness has always been God's workshop. He doesn't need crowds to crown someone. He does His best work behind closed doors. And baby, while they thought you were losing, you were actually learning. You weren't breaking, you were being built. While they huddled in their circles, trading stories and labeling your silence as weakness, something deeper was happening. You were shedding the unnecessary, gaining weight in spirit, finding out what really matters. And let me tell you something they'll never admit. The version of you they tried to erase, gone. A new one rose up in its place. Rooted, refined, and undeniably chosen. See, when you stop depending on their applause, you start hearing God's instructions, and that's what scares them. You found power they can't buy, favor they can't mimic, and peace that doesn't need to be proven. They were expecting you to beg, to crawl back, to need their approval like air. But when they finally looked again, they didn't find desperation. They found dominion. And now they're uncomfortable, not because of anything you did, but because of who you've become. Because when the dust settled and the door they closed stayed closed, something holy happened. You didn't just recover, you resurrected. And the truth is, their biggest mistake wasn't walking away. It was assuming you needed them to begin with. Don't just watch. Be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come. They misjudged your nature entirely, expecting to find a survivor clinging to scraps, grateful for the bare minimum. They were bracing for damage control, not transformation. But what emerged wasn't wounded, it was uncontained. You were never simply passing through trials, you were altering the landscape itself. You didn't wait for things to settle. You became the catalyst that unsettled everything. Their rules fell short because your existence isn't shaped by permission or predictability. They looked for panic, hesitation, retreat, but instead they found momentum, strategy, and fearless movement. While they clung to structure, you thrived in unpredictability, shifting the entire playing field before they realized the game had changed. They tried to corner what was never meant to stay still. Labels didn't fit, limits didn't hold, and every attempt to pin you down only revealed how little they understood of forces that operate beyond containment. You weren't built to endure storms. You were carved to reset atmospheres. That's why they can't get ahead of you. Every move they make is in response to something you've already outgrown. And now, as they scramble to regain a sense of control, they're beginning to see you were never at the mercy of chaos. You were the one rewriting its pattern. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Isaiah 43:19. Let me tell you something real clear. When God does a new thing in you, it doesn't come with a public service announcement. It comes in quiet shifts, subtle awakenings, divine rewiring. And those who once thought they had you figured out, they're standing there now baffled, because they're still reaching for the version of you that doesn't even exist anymore. They built strategies, reactions, whole narratives around who you used to be. That old you, the one who would explain yourself, apologize for taking up space, tolerate the disrespect, that one's been laid to rest. They're clinging to history while you've stepped into destiny. They rehearsed every scene in their playbook, thinking they'd get a familiar outcome, but the script's been rewritten and the lead character has evolved. See, when favor hits your life, it doesn't just elevate you, it transforms you. What they once read as insecurity has now become unshakable discernment. What they thought was softness is now unbending resolve. They keep pressing old buttons expecting the same result, but those buttons ain't even connected anymore. That wiring was removed in the quiet places, in the midnight hours, when heaven was doing construction on your soul. You're no longer living from memory, you're living from mission. You've changed the locks. They don't even have access anymore. They're speaking to the past, trying to provoke the previous version of you, but all they're hitting is air. And now they're left staring at someone they can't recognize. Someone unbothered, unavailable, and untouchable. And here's the truth. They weren't ready for this you, because this you didn't arrive by accident. This you was called, refined, appointed. The you that stands here now didn't emerge for their approval. You were called for a higher assignment. So don't be surprised if they look confused. Let them stay confused. That's what happens when people hold on to what was, while you're already walking boldly into what is. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come. They assumed hardship would hollow you out, drain your will, fracture your spirit, leave you diminished. But instead of collapsing under pressure, you absorbed it like a forge does heat, reworking every sting, every scar into a sharper edge. Pain didn't dilute your essence, it intensified it. While others buckled from the weight, you learned to carry it differently. You didn't run from it or try to erase it. You extracted the code, decoded the lesson, and folded it into your evolution. What they meant to use as weapons became tools in your hands. Every fall recalibrated your balance. Every closed door became a wall you learned to scale. While they waited for you to break, they were unknowingly contributing to your momentum. You stopped seeing pain as punishment and started treating it as preparation. Their miscalculation wasn't just in underestimating your endurance. It was in failing to see that you don't rebound, you reconfigure. And now, they're left trying to piece together how someone built so thoroughly from the rubble. But the truth is simple. What they thought would finish you only became the blueprint for a force they can't comprehend. Because while they were trying to drain your strength, they were unknowingly becoming the reason it multiplied. They operated under the illusion that everything could be purchased, that influence could rewrite outcomes, and that enough control could cancel out truth. They leaned into backroom tactics and shallow alliances, convinced that your path could be redirected with the right offer, the right threat, or the right name. But they failed to understand that you move beyond markets, outside their systems. Your foundation wasn't built in rooms of compromise or on currency that fades. While they tried to trade their way into dominion, you kept walking through unseen doors they never even noticed existed. Their wealth was their confidence, and that's exactly where they went wrong, believing that cost equates to power. But you don't bend for what glitters. They mistook silence for submission and mistook simplicity for absence of force. What they never grasped is that real worth can't be tagged, bartered, or silenced. You weren't positioned by human approval, and your rise doesn't require permission. While they invested resources into controlling outcomes, you simply outgrew their reach. Now every move they made is unraveling. Every deal is collapsing. Because they gambled on a system that was never designed to contain someone like you. And what stands before them now is undeniable proof. They brought everything they had to the table, and it still wasn't enough. They anticipated retaliation, as if chaos was your native language. They were certain you'd retaliate, burn bridges, and fixate on undoing what they'd done. But what they never calculated was your refusal to orbit around their destruction. Their actions were loud, dramatic, designed to provoke, but you answered with stillness. Not because you were weak, but because you understood that noise doesn't build thrones. They weren't targeting you as a person. They were trying to snuff out the current you carry, the gravity you walk in without needing to announce it. They mistook restraint for retreat, not knowing that some victories don't shout. They outlast. While they waited for the fire to come from your hands, they missed that the true reckoning was already happening. Your presence, unshaken, undeniable, and beyond their grasp. No revenge was required because their downfall was seeded in the moment they underestimated your silence. While they tried to dismantle your name, you kept moving, kept building, and now your very continuation is the disruption. The more you evolve, the more irrelevant they become. And the sting isn't from what you did, but from everything you didn't need to do to win. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. Let me tell you, family, just because a weapon forms doesn't mean it has the power to finish you. People will craft strategies, lay traps, twist narratives, all while assuming they've got you figured out. But what they don't know is this: God already saw it coming. And not only did he block it, he used it to graduate you. They were so sure you'd play the part they wrote for you. They had seen it work before. Tug on a string here, push an old wound there, speak a little guilt, toss in some manipulation, and boom, control. They expected you to unravel right on cue. But when their usual tricks hit a wall of stillness, when the reactions didn't show up, when your silence wasn't surrender, but sovereignty, that's when their grip began to slip. Because here's the truth. The old you, the one that used to shrink, overthink, over-explain, is gone. You laid that version down, not out of bitterness, but because it was no longer compatible with the calling on your life. You didn't just stop playing the game, you left the arena. And now, every tool they once used to stir your storm is rusted in their hands. Every scheme designed to provoke you now falls flat, because there's nothing left in you that matches the frequency of their dysfunction. You've matured past the manipulation, graduated from the guilt, moved beyond the mind games. You didn't fight them, you outgrew them, and in doing so, you took your piece off the market. No more bartering your worth for their approval, no more adjusting your shine to make their shadows feel comfortable. You've rewritten the entire equation, and they're stuck doing math with numbers that don't even exist anymore. So don't be surprised when they act confused. Let them fumble. That confusion, that silence, that's not your burden. It's the sound of old systems collapsing under the weight of your evolution. You don't need to prove anything. You've already become the proof. They assumed your story would end in fragments, worn, weathered, and defined by what you endured. They thought the best-case outcome was survival, stitched together by the remnants of what once was. What they couldn't fathom was that you weren't built to merely make it through. You were built to rise beyond it all, not as someone untouched by pain, but as someone unshaped by its limits. You didn't wait for the storm to pass. You rewrote your form in its center. You didn't return seeking closure. You discarded the need for it entirely. Every strike became part of your elevation, not because it strengthened you, but because you refused to be held by the terms they left behind. You advanced not through resistance, but through release. Now they scan the horizon looking for someone still struggling, still looking back, but there's nothing left of that version to find. You moved too far, too fast, too freely. They're left watching, bewildered, holding expectations that no longer match your frequency. And the real weight pressing on them now isn't your success. It's the realization that you were never theirs to break, never theirs to limit, never theirs to define. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come. They rely on illusion as armor, carefully layered masks to sway minds and manufacture control. Everything they built stands on unstable ground, disguised as certainty. And then you arrived, not loud, not confrontational, just real. No announcement, no accusation, yet everything around them began to tremble. Not because of anything you said, but because of what you didn't need to. You didn't match their performance, and that alone unbalanced the entire act. Authenticity can't be mimicked, and they know it. It's not that you expose them directly, it's that their facades wilt in the contrast of your clarity. Their discomfort isn't rooted in fear of being called out, but in the truth that your presence removes the shadows they once used to hide. They avoid you not out of hatred, but because they can't maintain their script in your atmosphere. Their power depended on no one noticing the cracks, but you are the crack, the fracture in the illusion. You are the reminder that truth cannot be choreographed or controlled, and so long as you remain, their false reality will always feel unstable. Not because you're tearing it down, but because you never agreed to live inside it. They misread the scoreboard from the very beginning. Convinced that control, noise, or sabotage could tip the balance in their favor, they launched their plans without realizing the outcome had already been sealed. The moment you chose not to fracture, not to mirror their chaos, not to surrender your essence, that was the moment the outcome shifted. While they clung to tactics and illusions of dominance, you stayed anchored in something they couldn't reach. They applauded their own assumptions, mistaking your quiet for collapse, blind to the reality unfolding just beyond their grasp. You weren't reacting, you were reassembling. Their fixation on appearances left them blind to the transformation underway. And now that you've emerged untethered, they're scrambling to process how the very person they tried to reduce became unreachable. The sting isn't just that you endured, it's that you outmaneuvered without engaging in the battle they prepared for. The rules they wrote no longer apply, the outcome they expected no longer exists, and they're left haunted by a truth they never considered. Their attempts to win were never enough because you were never theirs to conquer. They were convinced that silence meant surrender, that isolation meant defeat, and that pressure would undo you. They miscalculated not because they underestimated your strength, but because they never understood your nature. While they moved pieces on a board they thought they controlled, you dissolved the game entirely. You didn't fight for survival. You disappeared into the forge and returned as something they couldn't categorize. The moment they thought they'd ended you was the same moment your reinvention began. What they labeled weakness was actually withdrawal into mastery. You didn't resist the fall. You rewrote the meaning of gravity. They were chasing shadows, unaware that you had already stepped beyond their reach. Every attempt to dismantle you only carved more clarity. Their stories held no power once you stopped listening. Their tactics lost meaning the moment you stopped needing to be understood. You became the echo they couldn't silence, the force they can't replicate. And now, without warning or revenge, your very being disrupts everything they tried to build. You don't need an audience. You don't need closure. You simply exist, and that in itself is the final disruption they never saw coming. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come.